Hey, you won't believe what happened last night. My husband's mistress, at dinner. Yeah, you heard right. I unleashed one file, and, well, let's just say it ended everything. You're gonna want to hear this one. If you like stories about unbelievable betrayals and even more unbelievable revenge, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you won't regret it. It all started about a year ago. Mark, my husband, had been distant. Working late, business trips I couldn't go on because, well, someone had to be home with the kids. I'm a stay-at-home mom. It's a choice I made, a choice we made, but sometimes I felt like he looked at me like I was less than. Like my days were just filled with playdates and grocery shopping. He never said it, but I felt it. The air thickened with unspoken criticisms. Anyway, the distance grew into a full-blown Grand Canyon-sized chasm. I started noticing things: a new cologne, fancier shirts, a locked phone, constantly locked. I tried to talk to him, of course. Is everything okay, Mark? I'd ask, trying to keep my voice casual. He'd just brush it off, saying he was stressed with work, that I was imagining things. Classic, right? Then came the lipstick stain on his collar. A shade I definitely didn't own. It was sloppy. Careless. Like he wanted me to find it. Maybe he did. Maybe he was just too much of a coward to actually end things himself. I hired a private investigator. I know, it sounds like something out of a movie, but honestly, I felt like I was in a movie, a really bad Lifetime one. The PI, a gruff woman named Brenda with a surprisingly comforting demeanor, confirmed my worst fears within a week. Her name was Tiffany. Blonde, younger, and apparently a paralegal at Mark's firm. The pictures Brenda provided, they were like a punch to the gut. Mark looked happy. Happier than I'd seen him in years. He was laughing, holding her hand, looking at her like she was the sun and the moon and all the stars combined. All the while, I was at home, making dinner, packing lunches, and wondering why he never looked at me that way anymore. I was devastated. I cried. I ate a whole pint of ice cream. I considered slashing his tires, but I knew I was better than that. I needed a plan. A good one. One that would make him regret ever crossing me. Then, last week, Mark casually mentions that he's invited a colleague over for dinner. A business associate he needed to impress. I almost choked on my wine. Tiffany. He was bringing Tiffany into my house, to my dinner table, to brazenly flaunt her in front of my face. The audacity. The sheer, unadulterated gall of the man. That's when I knew what I had to do. I spent the next few days researching. Digging. I knew Mark kept work files on his home computer. Sensitive files. Confidential client information. The kind of stuff that could land him in serious trouble if it got into the wrong hands. I'm not usually a snoop, but desperate times. He had this ancient laptop he rarely used anymore. It was slow, clunky, and he'd all but forgotten about it. Perfect. The night of the dinner party arrived like a slow-motion train wreck. I set the table with our best china. I cooked his favorite meal, pretending everything was normal, while inside, I was a volcano bubbling with rage. Tiffany arrived right on time, dressed in a ridiculously tight dress and enough perfume to knock out a small horse. She gave me a sickly sweet smile and a compliment on the house that felt like a slap in the face. So lovely to finally meet you, Mrs. Thompson, she purred, extending a manicured hand. I forced a smile and shook it, resisting the urge to crush her bones. Please, call me Sarah. Dinner was excruciating. Mark was all charm and smiles, showering Tiffany with attention while barely acknowledging me. They talked about work, about cases, about inside jokes that I wasn't privy to. I felt invisible. Like I was just the hired help, there to serve them dinner and then disappear. "Oh, Sarah, this salmon is just divine," Tiffany gushed, batting her eyelashes at Mark. "You're quite the cook." "Thank you," I said, my voice tight. "It's a recipe I've been perfecting for years." "The years we've been married," I wanted to add, but I bit my tongue. As they were finishing dessert, I excused myself, saying I needed to check on the kids. "Be right back," I chirped, maybe a little too brightly. I went to the study. The ancient laptop was exactly where I'd left it. I booted it up, my hands shaking slightly. I found the file I was looking for. It was a large one, filled with sensitive client data, including financial records and personal information. The kind of stuff that could ruin careers and lives. With a deep breath, I copied the file onto a USB drive. Then, I logged into an anonymous email account I'd created earlier that day. I attached the file, addressed it to the State Bar Association, and hit send. My heart was pounding. There was no turning back now. I went back to the dine-in room, just as Mark was refilling Tiffany's wine glass. "Everything okay, honey?" Mark asked, his eyes narrowed slightly. "Perfect," I said, smiling sweetly. "Just perfect." The next morning, the storm hit. Mark got a call from his office. He turned white as a sheet. I pretended to be concerned, asking him what was wrong. "There's been a security breach," he stammered, his voice trembling. "Sensitive client information, it's been leaked." Tiffany's face mirrored his shock. She looked like she was about to throw up. Then came the real bombshell. "They know," he whispered, his eyes wide with panic. "They know it came from my home network." He stared at me. The realization dawned on his face. He knew. He knew I was behind it. "Did you?" he started to ask, but I cut him off. "Did I what, Mark? Cook you a delicious dinner? Keep your house clean? Take care of your children while you were working late?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Tiffany, sensing the shift in power, started gathering her things. I should probably go," she mumbled, her face pale. Mark didn't even notice her leaving. He was too focused on me. "How could you?" he asked, his voice filled with betrayal. "How could I? You brought your mistress to my house, Mark. You flaunted her in front of me. You treated me like I was nothing. What did you expect?" I screamed, years of pent-up anger finally exploding. He tried to apologize, to explain, but I wouldn't let him. I told him to get out. "Get out of my house, get out of my life." He left. And Tiffany? She vanished faster than you can say, ethics violation. The aftermath was complicated. Mark lost his job. His reputation was ruined. Our marriage was over. But you know what? I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. I had stood up for myself. I had taken my power back. The divorce was finalized a few months later. I got the house, the kids, and a hefty alimony settlement. Mark is now working at some small firm in another state. I hear Tiffany moved too, and is now working as a waitress. Funny how things work out, isn't it? Sometimes, I wonder if I went too far. If I should have just left, taken the high road. But then I remember the lipstick stain, the happy pictures, the way he made me feel invisible. And I know I did what I had to do. So, yeah, I unleashed one file. And it ended it all. What do you think? Was I right to do what I did? Or should I have taken a different approach? Let me know in the comments. And if you have any revenge stories of your own, I'd love to hear them. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more unbelievable stories. Until next time. It all started around the time our youngest, Lily, turned 3. It was a milestone, I thought. The diapers were gone, the toddler tantrums were, mostly, behind us, and maybe, just maybe, Mark and I could start rediscovering each other. God, how naive I was. Mark had always been driven, ambitious. That's what attracted me to him in the first place. He had this energy, this laser focus that made him incredibly successful. He was a rising star at his law firm, Thompson and Davies. He had a corner office, a secretary who seemed terrified of him, and a string of impressive victories under his belt. But lately, that drive had morphed into something else. Something obsessive. The long hours stretched even longer. The occasional weekend work bled into every Saturday and Sunday. The business trips became more frequent, always to some far-flung location I couldn't possibly attend because, well, someone had to be home with the kids. I was Sarah Thompson, stay-at-home mom, keeper of the house, chauffeur of the kids, and apparently, invisible wife. It wasn't that I regretted my choice. I loved my children fiercely, and I cherished the time I got to spend with them. But sometimes, when Mark looked at me, I could see a flicker of pity? Disappointment? It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Like he was thinking, she used to be so vibrant, so ambitious. Now look at her, covered in Play-Doh and Cheerios. He never said those things, of course. He was too polite, too well-bred. But the unspoken words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Everything okay, Mark? I'd ask, trying to sound breezy, casual, like I wasn't desperately searching for cracks in the foundation of our marriage. He'd usually be standing by the kitchen island, tie loosened, staring at his phone. He'd look up, his brow furrowed. Just work, honey. Big case. Lots of pressure. He'd kiss me on the forehead, a fleeting, perfunctory gesture that left me feeling colder than before. You wouldn't understand. And that was the kicker, wasn't it? He was right. I didn't understand. My days were filled with the minutiae of childhood, deciphering toddler babble, negotiating snack time disputes, and wiping up endless spills. His were filled with high-stakes legal battles, million-dollar deals, and the intoxicating thrill of victory. We lived in separate worlds, and the distance between us was growing exponentially. The signs started piling up, little red flags waving frantically in the wind. A new cologne, something musky and sophisticated that didn't smell like Mark at all. Fancier shirts, tailored and expensive, replacing the comfortable, slightly rumpled ones he used to wear. And the phone, always locked, always clutched possessively in his hand, even at the dinner table. Who are you texting? I asked one night, trying to keep my voice light. He jumped, startled. Just a colleague, he mumbled, his eyes darting away. Work stuff. I knew he was lying. I could feel it in my gut, a cold, hard knot of dread that tightened with each passing day. Then came the lipstick. It was a Tuesday morning, I think. I was gathering his shirts for the dry cleaner, and there it was, a smear of bright red lipstick on the collar of his favorite white dress shirt. A shade so garish, so unlike anything I would ever wear. It was sloppy, careless, like a deliberate act of defiance. Or maybe, a cry for help. Maybe he wanted me to find it, to confront him, to end the charade. I stared at the stain, my mind reeling. It felt like a physical blow, a punch to the solar plexus that knocked the wind out of me. I sank onto the bed, clutching the shirt to my chest, tears stinging my eyes. "He's cheating on me," I whispered, the words tasting like ashes in my mouth. "He's really cheating on me." For days, I was a mess. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I could barely function. I walked around in a daze, haunted by the image of that lipstick stain, by the thought of Mark with another woman. I considered confronting him, screaming at him, throwing things. But I knew that wouldn't solve anything. He'd just deny it, lie to me, gaslight me until I doubted my own sanity. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I hired a private investigator. Brenda wasn't what I expected. I'd envisioned some shadowy figure in a trench coat, lurking in dark alleys. Brenda was a middle-aged woman with short, salt and pepper hair, a no-nonsense demeanor, and surprisingly kind eyes. She ran a small agency out of a nondescript office building downtown. "I've seen it all, honey," she said, her voice gravelly but reassuring. "Don't feel ashamed. This happens more often than you think." I told her everything: the long hours, the locked phone, the lipstick stain, the gnawing feeling of unease that had been building inside me for months. Brenda listened patiently, nodding occasionally, her expression impassive. "I'll need a retainer, of course," she said, when I was finished. "And a recent photo of your husband." The money was a problem. Our finances were complicated. Mark controlled everything. I had access to a joint account for household expenses, but I knew he monitored it closely. Hiring a PI would require secrecy, a separate account, a way to explain the withdrawals. I didn't have a job. I ended up selling some jewelry my grandmother had left me. It felt like a betrayal of sorts, pawning off a piece of my family history. But it was worth it, I told myself. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Within a week, Brenda had the goods. The photos were delivered in a plain brown envelope, slipped under my door while I was at Lily's ballet class. I remember sitting in my car, hands shaking, heart pounding, as I tore open the envelope. The pictures were brutal. There was Mark, laughing, his arm around a blonde woman who looked barely out of her 20s. They were at a restaurant, a fancy Italian place downtown. They were holding hands across the table, their fingers intertwined. He was looking at her with an intensity, an adoration that I hadn't seen in years. Her name was Tiffany, Brenda informed me. A paralegal at Mark's firm. Blonde, ambitious, and according to Brenda's sources, very, very good at her job. There were more pictures: Mark and Tiffany entering a hotel, Mark and Tiffany leaving his office late at night, Mark and Tiffany kissing in a park. Each photo was like a fresh stab wound, twisting the knife a little deeper. I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air in a sea of betrayal. He was happy. Happier than I'd seen him in ages. All the forced smiles, all the empty promises, all the lies, it all made sense now. He was getting his happiness somewhere else, with someone else. I went home, locked myself in the bathroom, and cried. I cried until my eyes were swollen and my throat was raw. I cried for my lost marriage, for my shattered dreams, for the years I had wasted on a man who clearly didn't value me. Then, I did something I hadn't done in years. I ate a whole pint of Ben & Jerry's Cherry Garcia ice cream. Straight from the carton, with a spoon. It was a pathetic attempt at self-soothing, but it helped, a little. The sugar rush numbed the pain, if only for a few minutes. I considered revenge. Petty, vindictive revenge. Slashing his tires, emptying his bank account, keying his car. But I knew I was better than that. I wouldn't stoop to his level. I needed something more elegant. More devastating. I needed a plan. A good one. One that would make him regret ever crossing me. Weeks turned into months. I continued to play the role of the dutiful wife, the oblivious mother. I made his favorite meals, I packed his lunches, I listened patiently to his stories about work, all the while plotting my revenge. I knew Mark kept work files on his home computer. He often worked from home on weekends, poring over documents, drafting briefs, preparing for trials. He was meticulous about his work, a perfectionist to a fault. And he was careless, arrogant enough to think he could keep everything separate, that I wouldn't notice. I also knew he had an old laptop stashed away in the study. A relic from his early days at the firm, slow, clunky, and all but forgotten. He used it occasionally for personal stuff, browsing the internet, checking emails. But it was still connected to the home network, still accessible. That's when the idea struck me. A slow burn that started as a flicker of anger and grew into a raging inferno. I started researching. Digging. Late at night, after the kids were asleep, would sneak into the study and fire up the old laptop. I learned about data breaches, about client confidentiality, about the legal ramifications of exposing sensitive information. I discovered that Mark was working on a particularly high-profile case, a merger between two major corporations. The documents he had on his computer were explosive: financial records, personal information, trade secrets. The kind of stuff that could ruin careers, destroy companies, and land him in serious trouble. I wasn't usually a snoop. I respected Mark's privacy, or at least, I used to. But desperate times called for desperate measures. He had betrayed me, humiliated me, and now, he was going to pay the price. The opportunity presented itself sooner than I expected. One evening, Mark casually mentioned that he was inviting a colleague over for dinner. A business associate he needed to impress. He said it was important for his career, a chance to network, to make connections. I almost choked on my wine. Tiffany. He was bringing Tiffany into my house, to my dinner table, to brazenly flaunt her in front of my face. The audacity. The sheer, unadulterated gall of the man. Who is it? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Just a friend from work, he said, avoiding my gaze. You'll like her. She's very bright. I knew exactly who he was talking about. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just an affair anymore. This was a calculated act of cruelty, a deliberate attempt to rub my face in his infidelity. That's when I knew what I had to do. I spent the next few days preparing for the dinner party. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, polishing the furniture, vacuuming the carpets, making sure everything was perfect. I wanted Tiffany to see what she was trying to take away from me, the beautiful home, the perfect family, the life I had built. I planned the menu meticulously. Mark's favorite meal, pan-seared salmon with roasted asparagus and lemon potatoes. A decadent chocolate cake for dessert. A crisp Sauvignon Blanc to complement the fish. I even bought a new dress. A sleek, black cocktail dress that showed off my figure without being too revealing. I wanted to look confident, sophisticated, like I wasn't a woman on the verge of a nervous breakdown. The night of the dinner party arrived like a slow-motion train wreck. I set the table with our best china, the delicate floral pattern a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I arranged the silverware with precision, folded the napkins into perfect swans, and lit the candles, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, a strange mix of fear and excitement. I was about to play the role of my life, the wronged wife, the unsuspecting hostess, the vengeful mastermind. The doorbell rang precisely at 7 p.m. I took a deep breath, plastered a smile on my face, and opened the door. Tiffany was exactly as Brenda had described her, blonde, beautiful, and oozing with a predatory confidence. She was wearing a dress that was too tight, too short, and too sparkly for a business dinner. Her perfume was overpowering, a cloying floral scent that filled the doorway. "So lovely to finally meet you, Mrs. Thompson," she purred, extending a perfectly manicured hand. I forced a smile and shook it, resisting the urge to crush her bones. "Please, call me Sarah." Mark stood behind her, beaming like a proud peacock. He put his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Tiffany, this is my wife, Sarah." The air crackled with tension. I could feel Tiffany's eyes sizing me up, assessing the competition. I returned her gaze, my expression carefully neutral. Come in," I said, gesturing towards the living room. "Dinner will be ready soon." The next few hours were excruciating. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, forced to watch my husband flirt with his mistress in my own home. Mark was all charm and smiles, showering Tiffany with attention while barely acknowledging me. They talked about work, about cases, about inside jokes that I wasn't privy to. They laughed, they touched, they exchanged knowing glances. I felt invisible, like I was just the hired help, there to serve them dinner and then disappear. "Oh, Sarah, this salmon is just divine," Tiffany gushed, batting her eyelashes at Mark. "You're quite the cook." "Thank you," I said, my voice tight. "It's a recipe I've been perfecting for years." "The years we've been married," I wanted to add, but I bit my tongue. Mark raised his glass. "To Tiffany," he said, his eyes sparkling. "For being such a valuable asset to the firm." "To Tiffany," I echoed, lifting my own glass. "For being so helpful." The dinner seemed to drag on forever. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped in a suffocating cloud of perfume and lies. The salmon tasted like ash in my mouth, the wine burned in my throat. As they were finishing dessert, I excused myself, saying I needed to check on the kids. "Be right back," I chirped, maybe a little too brightly. I went to the study, my heart pounding in my chest. The ancient laptop was exactly where I'd left it, gathering dust on the corner of the desk. I booted it up, my hands shaking slightly. The screen flickered to life, the familiar Windows logo a beacon of hope in the darkness. I found the file I was looking for, buried deep within the labyrinthine folders of Mark's hard drive. It was a large one, labeled Project Nightingale, the code name for the merger case. It was filled with sensitive client data, including financial records, personal information, and confidential legal strategies. The kind of stuff that could ruin careers and lives. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing pulse. There was no turning back now. Once I unleashed this file, there would be no going back. I copied the file onto a USB drive, the tiny light on the drive blinking furiously. Then, I logged into an anonymous email account I'd created earlier that day, using a public Wi-Fi network at a coffee shop miles away. I attached the file, addressed it to the State Bar Association, and typed a brief, anonymous message. "I believe this information may be of interest to you." With a trembling hand, I hit send. The deed was done. The digital domino had fallen. Now, all I had to do was wait. I went back to the dining room, just as Mark was refilling Tiffany's wine glass. They were laughing, their heads close together, their bodies almost touching. "Everything okay, honey?" Mark asked, his eyes narrowed slightly. "Perfect," I said, smiling sweetly. "Just perfect." The next morning, the storm hit. Mark got a call from his office around 8 a.m. I was in the kitchen, making breakfast for the kids, trying to act normal. He answered the phone, his expression suddenly turning grim. He listened for a few minutes, his face growing paler with each passing second. "There's been a security breach," he stammered, his voice trembling. "Sensitive client information, it's been leaked." He hung up the phone, his eyes wide with panic. Tiffany, who had conveniently spent the night, sat at the kitchen counter, sipping coffee. Her face mirrored his shock. She looked like she was about to throw up. "What is it?" I asked, feigning concern. "What's wrong?" He ran a hand through his hair, his face a mask of despair. "I don't know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. They said someone leaked confidential client information." Then came the real bombshell. "They know," he whispered, his eyes wide with panic. "They know it came from my home network." He stared at me, his eyes filled with suspicion. The realization dawned on his face. He knew. He knew I was behind it. "Did you?" he started to ask, but I cut him off. "Did I what, Mark? Cook you a delicious dinner? Keep your house clean? Take care of your children while you were working late?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Tiffany, sensing the shift in power, started gathering her things. I should probably go," she mumbled, her face pale. "I have a meeting." Mark didn't even notice her leaving. He was too focused on me, his eyes burning with anger and betrayal. "How could you?" he asked, his voice filled with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "How could I? You brought your mistress to my house, Mark. You flaunted her in front of me. You treated me like I was nothing. What did you expect?" I screamed, years of pent-up anger finally exploding. He tried to apologize, to explain, to deny everything. But I wouldn't let him. I told him to get out. Get out of my house, get out of my life. He left, slamming the door behind him, the sound echoing through the house. And Tiffany? She vanished faster than you can say ethics 6. Elation, leaving behind a lingering scent of cheap perfume and shattered illusions. The aftermath was complicated. Mark was suspended from his job. He was facing a disciplinary hearing with the State Bar Association. His reputation was in tatters. Our marriage was over. Officially, irrevocably, over. But you know what? I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. I had stood up for myself. I had taken my power back. The following weeks were a blur of lawyers, divorce papers, and tense conversations with my children. Mark moved out, taking only a few personal belongings. The house felt strangely empty without him, but also liberated. The divorce was finalized a few months later. It was a messy, acrimonious process, but I emerged victorious. I got the house, the kids, and a hefty alimony settlement. Mark was forced to sell his share in the firm, his career in ruins. I heard through the grapevine that he was now working at some small, obscure firm in another state, handling mundane cases far removed from the high-stakes world he once inhabited. And Tiffany? She vanished from the legal scene altogether. Rumor had it she moved to a small town in the Midwest and was now working as a waitress at a diner. Funny how things work out, isn't it? Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the kids are asleep, I wonder if I went too far. If I should have just left, taken the high road, spared Mark the humiliation and the professional ruin. But then I remember the lipstick stain, the happy pictures, the way he made me feel invisible. And I know I did what I had to do. I protected myself, I protected my children, and I sent a clear message: don't mess with Sarah Thompson. So, yeah, I unleashed one file. And it ended it all. What do you think? Was I right to do what I did? Or should I have taken a different approach? Let me know in the comments. And if you have any revenge stories of your own, I'd love to hear them. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more unbelievable stories. Until next time. The slow descent into marital oblivion felt like watching a glacier calve. Beautiful, awe-inspiring in its destructive power, and utterly inevitable. It wasn't a sudden cataclysm, a single explosive fight, but a gradual erosion, a silent retreat of intimacy and connection. It had been almost 10 years since our whirlwind romance ignited in a crowded Chicago bar. I was a bright-eyed, ambitious paralegal, fresh out of law school and eager to conquer the world. Mark, with his charming smile and disarming wit, was a young associate, already making waves in the legal community. We bonded over late-night study sessions, shared dreams of professional success, and a mutual love for deep-dish pizza. The wedding was a fairy tale. A lavish affair at a historic mansion, surrounded by family, friends, and enough floral arrangements to trigger allergies in half the guests. We danced the night away, convinced we were destined for a lifetime of happiness. The kids followed soon after. First Emily, a miniature version of Mark with his piercing blue eyes and mischievous grin. Then Lily, a fiery redhead with my stubborn streak and insatiable curiosity. Motherhood was all-consuming, a beautiful, exhausting, and utterly transformative experience. I made the conscious decision to put my career on hold, to dedicate myself to raising our children. Mark, fueled by my unwavering support, soared to new heights at the firm. He became a partner, a rainmaker, a legal titan. But somewhere along the way, we lost each other. The shared dreams faded, replaced by separate ambitions. The late-night conversations dwindled, replaced by strained silences and perfunctory exchanges. The physical intimacy became a distant memory, a faded photograph in the album of our past. I tried, God, I tried. I suggested date nights, weekend getaways, couples therapy. But Mark always had an excuse: a demanding client, a crucial case, a last-minute business trip. He became increasingly distant, emotionally unavailable. He was physically present, but mentally, he was miles away. I felt like I was living with a ghost, a hollow shell of the man I had fallen in love with. The subtle signs of his infidelity began to surface like insidious weeds, choking the life out of our marriage. The new cologne, a scent that clashed with his natural musk, clinging to his clothes like a silent accusation. The meticulously pressed shirts, ironed with a precision I never witnessed at home. The locked phone, clutched possessively, guarding its secrets with digital ferocity. The work trips grew longer, more frequent, and suspiciously timed around holidays and anniversaries. He always returned exhausted, jet-lagged, and emotionally detached. "Everything okay, Mark?" I'd ask, my voice laced with a fragile hope that he would finally confess, that we could salvage something from the wreckage. He'd sigh, run a hand through his perfectly styled hair, and offer a pat. Response: "Just stressed, honey. Big case. Lots of pressure. You wouldn't understand." The words were like a slap in the face. He was right, I didn't understand. I didn't understand the allure of power, the seduction of success, the temptation of forbidden fruit. The lipstick stain was the final straw, the undeniable proof of his betrayal. A garish crimson smear on the pristine white collar of his favorite shirt. A shade so blatantly wrong, so deliberately careless, that it felt like a calculated act of defiance. I remember staring at that stain, my heart shattering into a million pieces. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the solid ground beneath my feet dissolving into quicksand. I spent the next few days in a state of numb disbelief, wandering through the house like a zombie. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I could barely breathe. The image of that lipstick stain was seared into my brain, a constant reminder of his infidelity. I considered confronting him, screaming at him, throwing him out of the house. But I knew that wouldn't solve anything. He would deny it, lie to me, gaslight me until I questioned my own sanity. I needed proof. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. That's why I hired Brenda. Brenda was a revelation. A no-nonsense, straight-talking woman who had seen it all. She didn't judge, she didn't pity, she simply listened and offered a pragmatic solution. "I'll get you the evidence you need," she promised, her eyes glinting with a quiet determination. "And then, you can decide what to do with it." The waiting was agonizing. Every phone call, every knock on the door sent my heart racing. I lived in a constant state of anxiety, bracing myself for the inevitable blow. The photos arrived a week later, delivered in a plain brown envelope. I remember sitting in my car, parked outside Lily's ballet class, my hands trembling as I tore it open. The images were stark, undeniable, devastating. Mark and Tiffany, entwined in each other's arms, their faces flushed with passion. They were laughing, holding hands, gazing into each other's eyes with an intensity that I hadn't seen in years. The photos were a visceral punch to the gut, confirming my worst fears and shattering the last vestiges of hope. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, and I had to fight the urge to vomit. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to compose myself. I had to be strong, for my children. I couldn't let them see me fall apart. I drove home in a daze, the photos burning a hole in my purse. I locked myself in the bathroom, sank to the floor, and let the tears flow. I cried for hours, a torrent of grief, anger, and betrayal. I cried for my lost marriage, for my shattered dreams, for the years I had wasted on a man who clearly didn't value me. When the tears finally subsided, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The shock and disbelief had worn off, replaced by a cold, burning rage. I was done. I was done being the dutiful wife, the oblivious mother, the doormat who allowed her husband to walk all over her. I was ready to fight back. I was ready for revenge. The dinner party was Mark's idea, a calculated act of cruelty designed to flaunt his affair in my face. He had the audacity to invite Tiffany into our home, to introduce her to our children, to pretend that everything was normal. I knew then that I couldn't let him get away with it. I couldn't let him humiliate me any further. I spent the next few days planning my revenge, meticulously crafting a strategy that would not only end his affair but also destroy his career and reputation. I knew about the sensitive files on his old laptop. He was careless, arrogant, and he underestimated my intelligence. He thought I was just a stay-at-home mom, oblivious to the complexities of his legal world. He was wrong. I spent hours researching data breaches, client confidentiality, and the legal ramifications of exposing sensitive information. I learned about the State Bar Association, the ethical codes that governed lawyers, and the penalties for violating those codes. I discovered that Mark was working on a high-profile merger case, involving two major corporations. The files on his laptop contained confidential financial data, trade secrets, and privileged communications. Exposing those files would not only ruin his career but also expose him to criminal charges. The night of the dinner party, I played the role of the perfect hostess. I smiled, I chatted, I refilled wine glasses, all the while seething with rage. Tiffany, dressed in a ridiculously tight dress and reeking of cheap perfume, was insufferable. She batted her eyelashes at Mark, flirted outrageously, and made snide remarks about my cooking and my wardrobe. I wanted to slap her, to scratch her eyes out, to tell her to get out of my house and never come back. But I knew I had to remain calm, to maintain my composure, to execute my plan. As they were finishing dessert, I excused myself, pretendin' to check on the kids. In reality, I went to the study, fired up the old laptop, and copied the sensitive files onto a USB drive. Then, I logged into an anonymous email account, attached the files, and sent them to the